Everyone to Daf Yomi 1 week at a time, Masechet Menachot. Today is our 12th class, and we are going to be reviewing Daf 80 through 86. 86 is actually tomorrow's Daf, but because we're doing it a day early, I figured we'd keep it to 1 week. So we're also going to be going ahead one day to also do tomorrow's Daf. Okay, we're going to jump right into Daf 80, where the Gemara discusses which we know. Okay, let's take a step back. Last week we talked about the Korban Todah, the Thanksgiving sacrifice that is brought with 40 loaves. Now, the Gemara on Daf 80 discusses cases where sometimes when you bring the sacrifice, you do not need to bring the 40 loaves. So the Gemara explains that if you take the parallel case, but with a chatat, with a sin offering, if the sin offering needs to be put to death, meaning for whatever reason, and the Gemara is going to speak out what the cases are, if that sacrifice is not brought and actually needs to be put to death, then in the parallel case for a Korban Todah, you do not bring the loaves with the animal. If the sin offering, the chatat, is sent to graze, the todah is brought with its loaves. And now the Gemara is going to speak out the cases. So if you lost the animal that was supposed to be the korban todah, and you got a new animal, and then you found the original one, so you can choose which animal you want to bring as the korban todah, and that animal comes with 40 loaves. But the other animal, right, either it's the original or the replacement, is still brought as a sacrifice, but it does not come with the 40 loaves. The Gemara says, but wait a minute, in the parallel case with a sin offering, the second animal will be sent out to graze, and then it may be in the Todah, it should come with the loaves. The Gemara says, no, actually, this is according to a different opinion, that the second one does die, and therefore the parallel case does not get any loaves with it. Let's say you designated two chataot, two sin offerings, and the second one was what's called achrayut. It's like the guarantee. If something happens to the first one, so then the second one will be there just in case. So now, again, you sacrifice one of them, the other one goes to graze. The Gemara says, no, it actually is killed, it dies. Therefore, in the parallel case with the Todah, it does not come with the 40 loaves. Okay, what happens if you bring the korban todah and you lose the 40 loaves? So the Gemara says, that's okay, you bring new loaves. If the animal got lost, you don't have to bring a new animal. Now the Gemara explains this is because the person said, this animal is going to be a korban todah, which means that the responsibility is on, or the sanctity is on the animal, and not on the person, right? There's two ways to obligate oneself to bring a sacrifice. You can either say, in Hebrew, it's harei alai korban todah. That means I don't promise, but if one would say, I promise to bring a korban todah. That means if I lose the animal, I have to go find another one. But if I say, harei zeh korban todah, that means the sanctity is going on the animal. And therefore, if you lose the animal, you do not have to bring a replacement. Let's say you separated money for the korban todah, and then you bought the animal, and let's say there was a sale, so there's leftover money from that. You can use the money to buy the loaves or the wheat for the loaves. If you have leftover money from the loaves, you can't use it to buy the animal, to buy the korban todah, because the loaves are called the todah, but the animal is not called the loaves, the lechem or the matzot, and therefore it's only interchangeable one way, but not the other way. Let's say again, the animal gets lost, and then you designated another one, and then it got lost again, and let's say you found all three animals. So if you gave, and then the Gemara goes through all the permutations, right? If you gave the first one, then the second one doesn't need loaves, but the third one does because it's a new korban todah. If you brought the third one, so then again, the second one doesn't need the loaves, but the first one does because it was the original sacrifice. And if you brought the second one, the middle one, then 1 and 3 don't need loaves at all. Or another opinion in the Gemara is only one sacrifice gets the loaves, all the others do not, right? And again, the same thing with a chatat. If again you had a chatat and then it got lost, and then you found it, and then you designated a new one, and it got lost. And again, if you do the same thing with a chatat, with a sin offering, you use one of them is put to death, meaning one of them dies, and one of them goes out to graze. So we have a similar idea. Then the Gemara has a case where the animal that is supposed to be a korban todah got mixed up with its basically it's what's called tmura. Tmura is where you try to take the sanctity off of one animal and put it on the other, like you thought that you could redeem the animal and move the sanctity from one animal to another. We'll learn there's a whole masachet called masachet tmura, but basically that doesn't work in the sense that the first animal does not lose its sanctity, but it does work in order to sanctify the second animal. So the second animal, I guess you can call it its replacement. It gets sanctity, but it's on a lower level. So that's called the tmura. So let's say that the original animal gets mixed up with the tmura animal, and then you don't know which one is which, and one of them dies. So the Gemara tells us you can't do anything with the surviving animal because we don't know, is it the tmura and then it wouldn't come with the loaves, or is it the todah and it does come with the loaves? One opinion is, no, actually, that you can bring a new animal with loaves and bring the old animal, and then you can say, if this one was the todah, so then the loaves are for this one, and if this one is the todah, so then the loaves are with this one. And then the Gemara literally gives 8 different options on what could be done with this animal. Oh, maybe do this, and the Gemara speaks out. I'll tell you a few of them. I didn't write all 8 down, but it speaks out all the different options. But in the end, it says really there's nothing to do, because in the end we don't really know what this animal is. Okay. So one of the options that's given on Daf 81 is you bring something, and then you say, again, if this is the todah, here are the loaves, and if it isn't the todah, then this new animal is the todah. But again, with each option, the Gemara actually has a problem with each one of the options that is given in the Gemara. And in the end, another option is the Gemara says, okay, maybe bring the loaves and then leave it outside of the temple when you bring the animal. The Gemara says, no, that doesn't work. Maybe you should bring 80 loaves, right? 40 for the original one and 40 for the new one. But then we have a problem because remember we said you have to eat all of those loaves in that day. And who's going to eat 80 loaves? Like you have to invite all of Yerushalayim. Or maybe you should bring 2 new animals and 80 loaves. And the Gemara says no. And basically the conclusion is there's nothing to do with the surviving animal and it cannot be a sacrifice. Okay, the next Mishnah tells us if a person says, I'm going to bring a korban todah, so then you have to bring the animal. Again, the korban todah is the animal and the loaves, the 40 loaves, and it has to be bought with money that is chulin. Chulin means regular, mundane money. It cannot be used, you can't use other money. We'll talk about which money you might want to use in a minute. Let's say you said, I'm going to bring the todah from chulin, from regular money, but the loaves I'm going to bring from maaser sheni money. Again, maaser sheni money is a tithe that a person needs to eat the produce in Jerusalem. Many times, especially if you lived far from Jerusalem, you can redeem the money onto coins, onto money. You took the money up to Jerusalem, and then with that money, you bought food and you had like a barbecue, a picnic in Jerusalem, and you ate whatever whatever you bought. So one could think, oh, I'm going to Jerusalem anyway. Why don't I use that money for my korban todah? Now here the Gemara says, wait, no, we can't do that. And you might think that maybe if I made this statement, again, I'm going to bring the todah from chulin and the loaves from maaser. So the Gemara says all of it needs to come from chulin, because as soon as you said, I'm going to bring the todah from chulin, the todah includes the animal and the loaves. So the next statement doesn't do anything because you're already obligated in the first statement. Let's say you said, I'm going to bring the todah from maaser and the loaves from chulin. That works. You can say that. Let's say if I say, it and the loaves are from maaser, that also works. But you cannot bring wheat that is maaser sheni, but you are allowed to bring the money that is maaser sheni. And the Gemara is going to explain what this means. So now the Gemara explains, when you say, I'm going to bring lachmei todah, right, the loaves of the todah, you have to bring the animal and the loaves. When you say the todah is from maaser and the loaves are from chulin, that also works. But again, it doesn't work in the reverse. If you say, I'll bring the todah, but I'm not bringing any loaves, right? I want to bring the animal, but I don't want any loaves. I don't know. I'm, gluten-free. I don't want to eat 40 loaves of matzah / bread, right? So the Gemara says, no, there's no such thing. You can't say that. You have to bring the loaves. You cannot have a korban todah without the 40 loaves. Okay, now the Gemara discusses, again, when I have two statements, does the second part of the statement cancel out the first part of the statement? So according to Beit Shammai, you always go according to the first part of the vow. So as soon as you said, I'm going to bring the todah from chulin, that's it. That's the end of this. It doesn't matter what you say afterwards. And that already obligates the person to bring the entire sacrifice from chulin. And therefore, the second part of the vow doesn't cancel out the first part. Or the Gemara says, even according to Beit Hillel, if the person says, listen, I would never have made this vow if I would have known that I needed to do all these things, it shows that really he wants to bring he really does want to bring the lechem, and therefore we force him to bring the lechem and to do it in the proper way. Okay, again, as we said, you need to bring the todah and the loaves, and you cannot take a vow to bring the todah without the loaves. Okay, all right. next. One second. Okay, Daf 82. The Korban Todah is learnt from the Shlamim. So what does it say that the Shlamim is also learned from Maaser Sheni. So again, it can't be that Maaser Sheni, the Shlamim cannot be Maaser Sheni, but it could be bought with the money of Maaser Sheni. The same thing with the Korban Todah. Again, as we said, the actual produce that is Maaser Sheni cannot be used for this sacrifice, but if you redeemed it onto money, that money can be used to buy this sacrifice. Okay, the Gemara continues that if you designated Maaser money as going to be used for a shlamim, again, the peace offering, that does not work. But if you use the Maaser money to buy an animal for the shlamim, now, if you bought the wrong type of animal, so then it doesn't work. But right, because it cannot be used for the wrong type of sacrifice, meaning it does not become sanctified. There's a machloket, and here this is a machloket in the Talmud with Maaser Sheni money, because on one hand, it's a tithe, and a tithe has sanctity to it. On the other hand, it's for the person to use for their own benefit, meaning you take the money and you buy food with it. So the big question in Shas is the money of Maaser Sheni seen as God's money, sanctified, holy, or it's seen as the owner's money? And therefore, if it's already God's money, so to speak, then it can't become shlamim because it's already sanctified. But if it's your own money, you can sanctify it however you see fit. When he redeems this money, let's say you want to redeem the Maaser Sheni money, you actually have to add 2/5, right? One, because you sanctified it as a shlamim, and one, because it is maaser. Okay, the next Mishnah on Daf 82 says, let's say a person says, I am going to bring a Todah. So again, as we said, you have to bring it from Cholin, and this is based on a verse, and therefore any sacrifice that is connected to the Korban Pesach, again, I love when Daf Yomi fits in with our life. So any sacrifice that is linked somehow to the Korban Pesach has to be bought from Chulin money, from mundane money. And the nesachim, the libations that come along with the sacrifice also need to come from Chulin money. So now the Gemara explains, right? Pesach, the Korban Pesach, the sacrifice, has to be bought with mundane money. How do we know this? Because Pesach, when it was brought in Egypt, right, the first time we did Korban Pesach, it came from mundane money. There's no such thing as sanctified money yet. And therefore, the Pesach always has to come from Chulin, even though you couldn't have sanctified money in Egypt. Now, there's another machloket throughout Shas. The concept or the principle is called, in Hebrew, danin efshar mi'i efshar, right? Can we compare two cases? If one of the cases, it would be impossible for this case to be any other way, but in a parallel case, it would not be impossible, but we compare the two. Or do we say, no, if it's efshar, if it's impossible, then how can I even compare it to another case where it would be possible? So I'll give you an example, right? Can I learn from, let's say, a sacrifice? I think the Gemara is going to bring it up in a minute, but a sacrifice, let's say, that is male, can I say all sacrifices, their offspring, right? Their offspring are not sanctified. Now, a male animal is never going to be pregnant. So how can I learn that to a female animal will be pregnant, right? So can I compare the two cases or not? That's the machloket. And here in our case, in Egypt, obviously there was no sanctified money. So the Gemara says, okay, it doesn't matter that it was impossible for them to have sanctified money, because it means that forever you can't use sanctified money, right? So again, the Gemara here is saying we do compare cases, even though the original case, it would have been impossible to construct this type of case. So again, the Gemara says, but wait a minute. In Egypt, right, Pesach was different. There's no altar. There's no Beit HaMikdash. There's no temple. The Gemara says it doesn't matter. The sacrifice needs to be the way it was done in Egypt. The Gemara says, okay, let's look at how it was done in the desert, right? In the desert, again, there's still no maaser, but the blood was put on the altar, so that works. So then again, we say, right, can we compare these two cases? The Gemara now brings a Braita that takes a verse that lists all of the sacrifices, and it says there's something that we learn from each type of sacrifice, meaning each sacrifice is unique, but teaches us something to all sacrifices. So it mentions the Olah. What do we learn from the Olah? That the Olah is slaughtered with a knife. Therefore, right, most sacrifices, again, some don't, but most sacrifices need to be slaughtered with a knife. And then the Gemara says that the Olah needs to be, specifically the Olah needs to be slaughtered with a knife. Other sacrifices do not need a knife. You can use any other sharp object. The Mincha is mentioned in this verse to teach that the mincha is only eaten by male priests, by male kohanim. Therefore, all other sacrifices are also only eaten by the male kohanim. Okay, Daf 83, the chatat teaches that anything that it touches becomes like the chatat, so too other sacrifices as well. The asham, again, and here's the case, right? That the asham is a male, and it teaches that the placenta and the afterbirth, which, by the way, the male doesn't have, but okay, right, aren't sanctified in any korban. So again, right, that's the question. Do you learn the male to the female? The offspring, the vlad of sanctified animal only becomes sanctified when it's born. But if it's in utero, it is not sanctified. The miluim, right, the sacrifices that were brought in the inauguration of the temple, the leftovers are burnt, but the living animals are not. So too, other animals, other sacrifices. The Shlamim teaches that just like it can become pigul, if you remember pigul from Masechet Zvachim, right, the improper intent, and it can affect pigul. Therefore, all other sacrifices have the same potential to become pigul. Okay, that Breita, that the first opinion is according to Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Akiva changes a few understandings. He says that the mincha it teaches that anything it touches becomes sanctified. So then that frees up the chatat. And then the chatat teaches that it only can be bought from chulin money and must be sacrificed during the day, and it must be done with the right hand. These are all based on verses of the chatat, and we learn this to all sacrifices. So here's the idea that it needs to be bought with regular mundane money. The Asham teaches that if the bones fall off the mizbeach, so then you can use those bones. And it says, "V'zavachta Pesach," that you sacrifice the Pesach. And what does that mean? That the extra money from the Pesach can be used to buy a shlamim. Now, again, now we have to do all the laws of the shlamim are like basically rolled over. Basically, if you have a Pesach, an animal that was supposed to be a Korban Pesach, and it was left over after Pesach, it becomes a Shlamim. And therefore, all the laws of the Shlamim are included for this animal. But let's say if it was left over and now it's over a year old, or it's after Pesach but under a year old, or you found it while it was still Pesach but you didn't need it anymore. All of these, there are 3 different verses that teach that all of these animals become shlamim. And with that, we finish the 8th chapter of Masachet Menachot. Okay, let's start the next chapter. And this chapter is going to go through all the different things that are brought with the sacrifice, meaning not the animals. At the end, it's the animals, but mostly the other things that are brought with the sacrifice. And where do we buy them? What are they supposed to look like? And it's going to go through each one of these things. So the Mishnah tells us that all sacrifices have to come, all sacrifices can come from Israel or from outside of Israel. For the mincha, it needs to come from the new grain, or maybe they can come from the old grain, except for the omer and the shtei halechem that have to be from the new grain and must come from Eretz Yisrael. All menachot need to come from the best fields, and now the Gemara tells us where those are. So the best grain comes from machis and zitra. The second best comes from aforaim, right? So like it actually gives us a specific places to get the best grain. You can bring it from anywhere, but these are actually the best places to bring them. So now the Gemara is going to explain that at the top of daf 84, that maybe the shtei halechem and the omer can actually come from old grain, but if you brought it from the old grain, you don't get like the extra mitzvah, but it would be okay even if you brought the old grain. That's a different opinion than our Mishnah. But it must come from Israel, or it can even come from outside of Israel. Now, the verse tells us when you come to the land, then you have to bring this sacrifice. So again, one would think that it teaches us it must come from the land. Another option is that it's teaching us the time. When you come to the land, you need to bring the sacrifice, but not necessarily the place that the wheat has to come from. Okay. Okay. On a Shemitah year, they would actually hire guards to protect the barley for the Omer. So the Gemara says, why didn't they just bring the old grain, right? This seems to prove that you need the new grain, right? The Gemara says that the verse says it needs to be caramel. Carmel, not to be confused with caramel, but caramel means that it must be ripe grain. It can't be old, dry grain. It also needs to be reshit tsirecha. It needs to be the first harvest. Therefore, it needs to be new grain and not old grain. It also needs to be what's called aviv, which means barley, and it needs to be the first grain. Since we talked about the first of your harvest, the Gemara talks about bikurim, right? Bikurim are the first fruits that are brought on Shavuot. The bikurim are from the 7 species that Israel is blessed with. And when you're bringing these species, don't bring dates from the mountains or grain from the valley, because these are inferior. We want to make sure that you're bringing the best of the best. Okay, we said that Omer needs to be new grain. Shtei halechem, again, the 2 loaves that are brought on Shavuot must be new wheat. You can't use new grain for sacrifices till after Shavuot, when you bring the Shtei Halechem, and the Bikurim comes after that. Also, the Nesachim can come from the wine libations, can come from new grapes after Shavuot, when you bring the Shtei Halechem. The Menachot can come from inferior grain, but not the Bikurim. Or another option is that you can use it for bikurim, because it becomes sanctified, and therefore it is okay. The crops that were grown on a roof or in a ruin or in a pot or on a boat can be used for bikurim, and you can even say the verses, or no, you can use it for bikurim, but you cannot read the verses. Again, the verses are Arami Oved Ovi, what we just said at Seder night from the Haggadah. Those are the verses that are read when you bring the bikurim. Okay, Daf 85. The next Mishnah tells us that you can't bring grain from a field that needed to be fertilized, or needed to be irrigated, or has a lot of trees growing among the grain. Again, because presumably all of these things are, it means that the field is an inferior field, and therefore the grain would be inferior. However, if you did bring the grain from these fields, it would be valid. The best way to plant your field for the grain for the Omer is to leave it fallow for 1 year, then plant it the second year, 70 days before Pesach, and that would make the best flour. And the treasurer, the gizbar of the temple, would check the wheat, and what would he do? He'd put his hand into the flour, and if he picked up his hand and it was dusty, it came out with dust, then he would tell them to sift it more. The idea is we want it to be fine flour, but without, apparently this dust is not good, means that the flour is not the best flour. And if it becomes wormy, so then you would need to it would be invalid, and you could not bring this type of flour. Okay, so now the Gemara says basically you plow the field, and then the next year you plant it. So the Gemara asks, is the field plowed on the second year as well, or you just plant it? So the Gemara will answer this in a minute. Another thing is that the Omer needs to be brought from south-facing fields, and you plow it, and then the second year you plow it and you plant it. And again, you plant it during this sunny season, and this will produce the best type of grain. So this seems to prove that you do plow it twice. Then the Gemara says, if the field was weeded beforehand, so then you don't need to plow it the second year. But if not, then you do need to do it. Another way to plant this field is to plow it and plant half the field, and then the next year plow it and plant the other half of the field, right? It's really amazing that the concept of crop rotation existed, thousands of years ago in the Gemara. Now, the Gemara says, what if you sanctified this wormy wheat? Do you get lashes for sanctifying a blemished offering, what's called a ba'alum, right? We know that if you sanctify an animal that has a blemish, and you do it on purpose, so then you actually get lashes for doing that, because it's not the proper way to sanctify an animal. So the Gemara says, well, is that only for animals that have a blemish, or is it anything that is a sacrifice and is blemished? Meaning this flour or wheat that has worms in it seems pretty blemished to me. So is that considered a Baal Mum or not? And the Gemara says, Teku. Okay, the next Mishnah tells us that, so we did wheat, now we're moving on to oil. Tekoa, the Gemara tells us that Tekoa is the best place for oil. Tekoa is about a 15-20 minute drive from me, and from Zohar as well. It's in Gush Etzion. So it is the best place for oil. The second best place is called Regev, which is in the Transjordan. But really you could bring oil from anywhere, but these are the best places. Now again, this Mishnah is going to be exactly parallel to the last Mishnah. You can't bring it from fields that needed to be fertilized, watered, or had things growing in it. But if you did, it would be valid. You cannot bring unripe olives, but if you did, then it would be okay. And you can't bring olives, or again, oil made out of olives that were soaked in water or pickled or boiled. And if you did, it would be invalid, right? So there's a certain point where it's too bad, or, not good, and cannot be brought at all. Okay, so the Gemara tells us that if you remember your Navi, Yoav brings a wise woman, an Isha Chachama, from Tekoa to David. The Gemara says, why did he have to bring her from Tekoa? So the Gemara says, because they had so much olive oil, it made people smarter, right? So if you remember, we learned that the Menorah, the oil, is intelligence, Chokhmah. So here we see that if you lived in Tekoa, you were smarter because of all the oil. Oil is also mentioned in the bracha, in the blessing to the tribe of Asher, that his portion in Israel will have a lot of oil. And then the Gemara gives this story about this city, this town up north that needed oil. So they sent this non-Jew to go get oil. And he basically like searched the whole country and finally found this man who they said like makes the best oil. And he sees him like working in the field, and he sees him like schlepping his own things. And then this non-Jew is thinking, the Jews are making fun of me that they sent me to this person. But it turns out that the person is like a multi-millionaire, and it gives him a ton of oil and is so kind and tells him, you can even take more oil and you can pay me back. And then the Gemara says, what's the moral of the story? That it says in Mishlei that there's a person who acts like they're rich, but really has nothing, and a person who looks like he's poor, but has a lot, right? When the Gemara is trying to say that if you want to be rich, it's about, rolling up your sleeves and working in the field and not just sitting around and waiting for wealth to come to you. So I thought that was a very interesting story. Okay, next, the last daf for today is daf 86. Which tells us that unripe olive oil is not even considered oil. It's like the juice or, the moisture, and it's not called oil. Some people would just throw it out. Other people would use it. So there's actually a machloket about this type of oil. It says in Megillat Esther that the women would soak 6 months in this type of oil, in this unripe olive oil. It says it's good for the skin, and also it's like a depilatory, but it's still not good for the menorah. And if the oil smells bad, it's invalid. And again, the question is, if it's considered, if you sanctified this bad smelling oil, is it seen as a blemished offering, a balmum or not? Okay, the next Mishnah is going to tell us how they made oil, right? So it tells us that olives are harvested 3 times a year, and each harvest has 3 stages of oil production. So we're going to, we'll have harvest A, B, and C, and oil 1, 2, and 3 from each one of these harvests. So what would you do? The first harvest, you pick the olives at the top of the tree because they had the most sun. Then you pound them and you put them in baskets or around baskets. And the oil that just flows out of them is the first, right? We'll call it 1, right? So A1. Then you take these baskets and you press them either with a beam or stones, and the oil that comes out is 2. And then you grind up what's left of the olives, and then you press that again, that olive mush, you press it again, that is 3. An olive press, by the way, in Hebrew is called a Beit Habad. And you can look it up, what it looks like. We actually have mentioned it in Masechet Shabbat, and in other Masechtot we've mentioned it. So that's basically the process of oil making. Now that was the first harvest. The second harvest are the oils, the olives that are at the height of the rooftops, basically, I guess what you would say, the middle of the tree. And again, you do the same thing, right? So you pound them and you put them in baskets. What runs out is 1. You press them, that's 2. You grind them and press them, that's 3. Sorry, I missed that. 1, meaning A1, also B1, that oil is used for the menorah, and then 2 and 3, either A, B, or C, is used for menachot. Okay, so again, A1 menorah, A2, 3 menachot. The same thing for B1 menorah, B2, B3 for menachot. The third harvest are olives that are not ripe, basically. So they put them in a vat till they spoil, basically they crack open, and then you dry them out on the rooftop, and then you do the same process again. Pound them, what comes out is 1, press them, 2, and then grind them, press them 3. Okay, so now, and then again, C1 for the menorah, C2 and 3 for the menachot. So the Gemara says, right, shemen zayit, it has to be directly from the olive. You might think that first you grind them and then you press them. The Gemara says no. Number one, like the best type, is where you don't grind it at all. And that is the best type of oil. Okay, the next Mishnah, the last Mishnah that we're going to do today, again, we said A1 is the best oil. Now, A2, so just if you can like keep it in your mind. So A2 and B1 are of equal like quality, and then A3, B2, and C1, right? So basically, you know, like go down. Those are equal in quality, and then B3 and C2 are equal, and C3 is the lowest. I hope I didn't lose you. I hope that was clear. If not, I can explain it again. Let me know. The Mishnah continues that all the menachot really should have the best oil, right? It's shemen zayit zach, right? Clear, the best oil. But again, the best oil really is for the menorah, and everything else can be used for the menachot. So now the Gemara says, again, as we said, B3 and C2 are equal in quality for the menachot. Again, what does it mean, shemen zayit zach? So zach means clear or pure. Katit means crushed olives or smashed olives. And again, really you should use the best for the menachot, but it's very expensive. So Hashem said, you know, you can use a little bit less of a quality for the menachot. And again, right, God says that the shemen zayit zach is for us, for Bnei Israel, meaning we need to use the best oil, but for us, not for God. What does that mean? That really, God does not need light. If you remember, we know that God was a pillar of light that led the Jewish people in the desert. He does not need light. He doesn't need us to light a menorah so he could see. Rather, the light is for us, and the Gemara proves it by the windows of the Beit HaMikdash. The windows of the Beit HaMikdash were narrow on the inside and wide on the outside. Normally, like if you're ever in old castles, it would be narrow on the outside and wide on the inside, also for defenses that you couldn't shoot in, but also to let the light in. Here, this is to let the light out, right? The menorah is to illuminate the world, not the inside of the Beit HaMikdash, right? It's to show and to be an aid, an edut, right? A testimony that the Shekhinah, God's presence, is with the Jewish people, and He is with us, and that light is something that is supposed to shine outside to everyone else. Okay, now we didn't finish the whole Daf 86, but there just is, we finished, there's another Mishnah at the bottom, so I think we're going to end here, and we will pick it up next week. Be'ezrat Hashem, next week we will have class at our regular day on Tuesday at this time. We have a few minutes, so if anybody wants to ask any questions, I'm happy to hear any questions or comments. And also, Moadim L'Simcha, I didn't even say that. I was so excited about Daf, but Chag Sameach to everyone, and I hope that you had a beautiful Chag, and so nice to see everyone. So yes, any questions, comments?
Thank you, Rabbanit. You're always great. You're always great. Thank you, Rabbanit. You're always great.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My granddaughter also says thank you.
Oh, hi.
Hey, hi.
I have a question, Rabbanit.
Yes.
So just, you know, as we're going through, these dafim were fantastic. They were so wonderful. There was this little section that caught my eye where they're talking carefully about, you know, what happens when an animal korban is invalid, becomes blemished, etc., and there could be lashes, whatever. And so, well, we're talking about the grain offering. So finally, a guy says, yeah, but what about that? It can be invalid. Do we get lashed? And then again, it's just taiku. Nobody knows. And they ask again a couple of different times about that. But is there anything else about that topic where it is discussed what happens to an invalid grain offering? How is it destroyed? Do you know?
Okay, so I think there's two aspects. One is the aspect of it being invalid and what you do with it. What you do with it is you burn it like another sacrifice away from the altar. This specific question was comparing the grain offering to the animal offering and saying, right, again, as we've done before, right, how parallel are these offerings? Are they so parallel that you can call a blemish, right, a blemish of an animal missing a leg? Is it the same as worms getting into the flour? So I think it was more about how parallel these two types of sacrifices are versus what do we do with an invalid sacrifice? I think that is less of the issue and more in terms of like how we compare them.
And they were asking if you were going to get lashed. That was the thing for the
Right, exactly.
So nobody wants to get lashes.
No,
So
exactly.
we didn't get an answer.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah, great question. Any other thoughts, comments?
I locked myself out of my house.
Oh,
You
I was
what?
gonna ask you how you're
This has
feeling,
been a
Lisa.
difficult month.
How are you feeling, Aliza?
My heart rate is normal, but I'm going to get two finger and two fingers so I can check it each day until I calm down.
Okay.
I
Well,
have to be able to
we're
see
hoping for a complete recovery.
That's if I'm reborn. You can't. It's not gonna. Not at
Well,
my.
we're hoping that you feel good.
Thank you, Baruch Hashem.
Okay. Well,
Okay.
want to send everyone a
Zohar,
Chag
put her back on
Sameach?
so I can see her.
Oh,
There she is. Who is she? Who is she,
She's-
Zohar?
That's my granddaughter. One of
Oh,
my granddaughter.
beautiful child. Thank you.
All right. Chag Sameach, everyone.
Chag
Enjoy the
Sameach.
last
Chag
day
Sameach.
of
Thank
Chag, the
you.
last
Sameach.
days.
Bye.
And
Days.
Shabbat Shalom.
May
And
be
Shabbat
very,
shalom.
very peaceful,
Shabbat.
Rabbanit, very peaceful for
Amen.
all of
Amen.
you, all of us. Peaceful, joyful, glorious, the best Pesach ever, and may we hear great news.
Amen.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you. Bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Okay.
Have a
Bye-bye.
good week.
You too.